Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Guards by Terry Pratchett. Part 6. You need a special kind of mind to rule a city like Ankh-Morpork, and Lord Veterinary had it. But then, he was a special kind of person. He baffled and infuriated the lesser merchant princes to the extent that they had long ago given up trying to assassinate him, and now merely jock-eyed for position amongst themselves. Anyway, an assassin who tried to attack the patrician would be hard put to it to find enough flesh to insert the dagger. While other lords dined on larks stuffed with peacocks' tongues, Lord Veterinary considered that a glass of boiled water and half a slice of dry bread was an elegant sufficiency. It was exasperating. He appeared to have no vice that anyone could discover. You'd have thought with that pale, equine face that he'd incline toward stuff with whips, needles, and young women in dungeons. Equine, relating to or affecting horses or other members of the horse family. You'd have thought with that pale, equine face that he'd incline toward stuff with whips, needles, and young women in dungeons. The other lords could have accepted that. Nothing wrong with whips and needles in moderation, but the patrician apparently spent his evenings studying reports and, on special occasions, if he could stand the excitement, playing chess. He wore black a lot. It wasn't particularly impressive black, such as the best assassins wore, but the sober, slightly shabby black of a man who doesn't want to waste time in the mornings wondering what to wear. And you had to get up very early in the morning to get the better of the patrician. In fact, it was wiser not to go to bed at all. But he was popular, in a way. Under his hand, for the first time in 1,000 years, Ankh-Morpork operated. It might not be fair or just or particularly democratic, but it worked. He tended it as one tends a topiary bush, encouraging a growth here, pruning an errant twig there. It was said that he would tolerate absolutely anything apart from anything that threatened the city. And here it was. He stared at the stricken wall for a long time, while the rain dripped off his chin and soaked his clothes. Behind him, once hovered nervously. Then one long, thin, blue-veined hand reached out and the fingertips traced the shadows. Well, not so much shadows, more a series of silhouettes. The outline was very distinct. Inside there was the familiar pattern of brickwork. Outside, though, something had fused the wall in a rather nice ceramic substance, giving the ancient flettons a melted, mirror-like finish. The shapes outlined in brickwork showed a tableau of 6 men frozen in an attitude of surprise, Various upraised hands had quite clearly been holding knives and cutlasses. Then Patrician looked down silently on the pile of ash at his feet. A few streaks of molten metal might once have been the very same weapons that were now so decisively etched into the wall. He said. Captain Vimes respectfully led him across the lane and into Fast Luck Alley, where he pointed out Exhibit A, to wit, "Footprints," he said, "which is stretching it a bit, sir. They're more what you'd call claws. One might go so far as to say talons." The patrician stared at the prints in the mud. His expression was quite unreadable. "I see," he said eventually. "And do you have an opinion about all this, Captain?" The captain did. In the hours until dawn, he'd had all sorts of opinions, starting with a conviction that it had been a big mistake to be born. And then the grey light had filtered even into the shades, and he was still alive and uncooked, and had looked around him with an expression of idiot relief, and seen not a yard away these footprints. That had not been a good moment to be sober. That had not been a good moment to be sober. "Well, sir," he said, "I know that dragons have been extinct for thousands of years, sir." "Yes?" The patrician's eyes narrowed. Vimes plunged on. "But, sir, the thing is, do they know? Sergeant Collins said he heard a leathery sound just before the offense." "So you think an extinct and indeed a possibly entirely mythical dragon flew into the city, landed in this narrow alley, incinerated a group of criminals, and then flew away?" said the patrician. "One might say it was a very public-spirited creature." "Well, when you put it like that, if I recall, the dragons of legend were solitary and rural creatures who shunned people and dwelt in forsaken, out-of-the-way places," said the patrician. "They were hardly urban creatures." "No, sir," said the captain, repressing a comment that if you wanted to find a really forsaken, out-of-the-way place, then the shades would fit the bill pretty well. "Besides," said Lord Veterinary, "one would imagine that someone would have noticed. Wouldn't you agree?" The captain nodded at the wall and its dreadful frieze. "Apart from them, you mean, sir?" "In my opinion," said Lord Veterinary, "it's some kind of warfare. Possibly a rival gang has hired a wizard. A little local difficulty." "Could be linked to all this strange thieving, sir," volunteered once. "But there's the footprint, sir," said Vimes doggedly. "We're close to the river," said the patrician. "Possibly it was, perhaps, a wadding bird of some sort. A mere coincidence," he added. "But I should cover them over if I were you. We don't want people getting the wrong idea and jumping to silly conclusions, do we?" he added sharply. Vimes gave in. "As you wish, sir," he said, looking at his sandals. The patrician patted him on the shoulder. Pat, pat. "Never mind," he said. "Carry on. Good show of initiative, that man. Patrolling in the shades, too. Well done." He turned and almost walked into the wall of chainmail that was Carrot. To his horror, Captain Vimes saw his newest recruit point politely to the patrician's coach. Around it, fully armed and wary, were 6 members of the palace guard, who straightened up and took a wary interest. Vimes disliked them intensely. They had plumes on their helmets. He hated plumes on a guard. He heard Carrot say, "Excuse me, sir. Is this your coach, sir?" And the patrician looked him blankly up and down and said, "It is. Who are you, young man?" Carrot saluted. "Lance Constable Carrot, sir." Carrot. That name rings a bell. Lupine once, who had been hovering behind him, whispered in the patrician's ear. His face brightened. "Ah, the young thief-taker. A little error there, I think, but commendable. No person is above the law, eh?" "No, sir," said Carrot. Commendable, said the patrician. "And now, gentlemen, about your coach, sir," said Carrot doggedly. "I couldn't help noticing that the front off-side wheel, contrary to the—" "He's going to arrest the patrician," Vimes told himself, the thought trickling through his brain like an icy rivulet. He's actually going to arrest the patrician, the supreme ruler. He's going to arrest him. This is what he's actually going to do. The boy doesn't know the meaning of the word fear. Oh, wouldn't it be a good idea if he knew the meaning of the word survival? And I can't get my jaw muscles to move. We're all dead, or worse. We're all detained at the patrician's pleasure, and as we all know, he's seldom that pleased. It was at this precise moment that Sergeant Colin earned himself a metaphorical medal. "Lance Constable Carrot!" he shouted. "Attention, Lance Constable Carrot! About a turner! Lance Constable Carrot! Quick marcher!" Carrot brought himself to attention like a barn being raised and stared straight ahead with a furious expression of acute obedience. "Well done, that man," said the patrician thoughtfully, as Carrot strode stiffly away. "Carry on, Captain, and do come down heavily on any silly rumors about dragons, right?" "Yes, sir," said Captain Vimes. "Good man." The coach rattled off, the bodyguard running alongside. Behind him, Captain Vimes was only vaguely aware of the sergeant yelling at the retreating Carrot to stop. He was thinking. He looked at the prints in the mud. He used his regulation pike, which he knew was exactly 7 feet long, to measure their size and the distance between them. He whistled under his breath. Then, with considerable caution, he followed the alley around the corner. It led to a small, padlocked and dirt-encrusted door in the back of a timber warehouse. There was something very wrong, he thought. The prints come out of the alley, but they don't go in. And we don't often get any wading birds. And we don't often get any wading birds in the Ankh, mainly because the pollution would eat their legs away. And anyway, it's easier for them to walk on the surface. He looked up. A myriad washing lines crisscrossed the narrow rectangle of the sky as efficiently as a net. So, he thought, something big and fiery came out of this alley, but didn't come into it. And the patrician is very worried about it. I've been told to forget about it. He noticed something else at the side of the alley, and bent down and picked up a fresh, empty peanut shell. He tossed it from hand to hand, staring at nothing. Right now he needed a drink, but perhaps it ought to wait. The librarian knuckled his way urgently along the dark aisles between the slumbering bookshelves. The rooftops of the city belonged to him. Oh, assassins and thieves might make use of them, but he'd long ago found the forest of chimneys, buttresses, gargoyles, and weather vanes a convenient and somehow comforting alternative to the streets. At least, up until now. It had seemed amusing and instructive to follow the watch into the shades. An urban jungle which held no fears for a 300-pound ape. But now the nightmare he had seen while brachiating across a dark alley would, if he had been human, have made him doubt the evidence of his own eyes. Brachiate, move by using the arms to swing from branch to branch.
Brachiating.
But now the nightmare he had seen while brachiating across a dark alley would, if he had been human, have made him doubt the evidence of his own eyes. As an ape, he had no doubts whatsoever about his eyes, and believed them all the time. Right now he wanted to concentrate them urgently on a book that might hold a clue. It was in a section no one bothered with much these days. The books in there were not really magical. Dust lay accusingly on the floor. Dust with footprints in it. "Oak," said the librarian in the warm gloom. He proceeded cautiously now, realizing with a sense of inevitability that the footprints seemed to have the same destination in mind as he did. He turned a corner, and there it was. The section, the bookcase, the shelf, the gap. There are many horrible sights in the multiverse. Somehow, though, to a soul attuned to the subtle rhythms of a library, there are few worse sights than a hole where a book ought to be. Someone had stolen a book. In the privacy of the oblong office, his personal sanctum, the patrician paced up and down. He was dictating a stream of instructions. "And send some men to paint that wall," he finished. Lupine once raised an eyebrow. "Is that wise, sir?" he said. "You don't think a frieze of ghastly shadows will cause comment and speculation?" said the patrician sourly. "Not as much as fresh paint in the shades," said Once evenly. The patrician hesitated a moment. "Good point," he snapped. "Have some men demolish it." He reached the end of the room, spun on his heel, and stalked up it again. Dragons! As if there were not enough real things to take up his time. "Do you believe in dragons?" he said. Once shook his head. "They're impossible, sir." "So I've heard," said Lord Veterinary. He reached the opposite wall, turned. "Would you like me to investigate further?" said Once. "Yes, do so." "And shall I ensure the watch take great care?" said Once. The patrician stopped his pacing. "The watch? The watch? My dear chap, the watch are a bunch of incompetents, commanded by a drunkard. It's taken me years to achieve it. The last thing we need to concern ourselves with is the watch." He thought for a moment. "Ever seen a dragon once? One of the big ones, I mean." "Oh, they're impossible," you said. "They're just legend, really. Superstition," said Once. Said the patrician. "And the thing about legends, of course, is that they are legendary." "Exactly, sir." "Even so." The patrician paused and stared at Once for some time. "Oh well," he said, "sort it out. Not having any of this dragon business. It's the type of thing that makes people restless. Put a stop to it." When he was alone, he stood and looked out gloomily over the Twin City. It was drizzling again. Ankh-Morpork, brawling city of 100,000 souls, and, as the patrician privately observed, 10 times that number of actual people. The fresh rain glistened on the panorama of towers and rooftops, all unaware of the teeming, rancorous world it was dropping into. Luckier rain fell on upland sheep, or whispered gently over forests, or patterned somewhat incestuously into the sea. Rain that fell on Ankh-Morpork, though, was rain that was in trouble. They did terrible things to water in Ankh-Morpork. Being drunk was only the start of its problems. The patrician liked to feel that he was looking out over a city that worked. Not a beautiful city, or a renowned city, or a well-drained city, and certainly not an architectural favored city. Even its most enthusiastic citizens would agree that, from a high point of vantage, Ankh-Morpork looked as though someone had tried to achieve in stone and wood an effect normally associated with the pavements outside all-night takeaways. But it worked. It spun along cheerfully like a gyroscope on the lip of a catastrophe curve. And this, the patrician firmly believed, was because no one group was ever powerful enough to push it over. Merchants, thieves, assassins, wizards, all competed energetically in the race without really realizing that it needn't be a race at all, and certainly not trusting one another enough to stop and wonder who had marked out the course and was holding the starting flag. The patrician disliked the word dictator. It affronted him. He never told anyone what to do. He didn't have to. That was the wonderful part. A large part of his life consisted of arranging matters so that this state of affairs continued. Of course, there were various groups seeking his overthrow, and this was right and proper, and the sign of a vigorous, and healthy society. No one could call him unreasonable about the matter. Why, hadn't he founded most of them himself? And what was so beautiful was the way in which they spent nearly all their time bickering with one another. Human nature, the patrician always said, was a marvelous thing, once you understood where its levers were. He had an unpleasant premonition about this dragon business. If ever there was a creature that didn't have any obvious levers, it was a dragon. It would have to be sorted out. The patrician didn't believe in unnecessary cruelty. He did not believe in pointless revenge, but he was a great believer in the need for things to be sorted out. Funnily enough, Captain Vimes was thinking the same thing. He found he didn't like the idea of citizens, even of the shades, being turned into a mere ceramic tint. And it had been done in front of the watch, more or less. And if the watch didn't matter, as if the watch was just an irrelevant detail, that was what rankled. Of course, it was true. That only made it worse. What was making him even angrier was that he had disobeyed orders. He had scuffed up the tracks, certainly, but in the bottom drawer of his ancient desk, hidden under a pile of empty bottles, was a plaster cast. He could feel it staring at him through 3 layers of wood. He couldn't imagine what had got into him. And now he was going even further out onto the limb. He reviewed his, for want of a better word, troops. He'd asked the senior pair to turn up in plain clothes. This meant that Sergeant Cullen, who had worn uniform all his life, was looking red-faced and uncomfortable in the suit he wore for funerals. Whereas Nobby... "I wonder if I made the word plain clear enough," said Captain Vimes. "It's what I wear outside work, Gov," said Nobby reproachfully. "Sir," corrected Sergeant Cullen. "My voice is in plain clothes too," said Nobby. "Initiative, that is." Vimes walked slowly around the corporal. "And your plain clothes do not cause old women to faint and small boys to run after you in the street?" he said. Nobby shifted uneasily. He wasn't at home with irony. "No, Sir Gov," he said. "It's all the go, this style." This was broadly true. There was a current fad in Ankh for big feathered hats, ruffs, slashed doublets with gold frogging, flared pantaloons, and boots with ornamental spurs. The trouble was, Vimes reflected, that most of the fashion-conscious had more body to go between these component bits, whereas all that could be said of Corporal Nobbs was that he was in there somewhere. It might be advantageous, after all. Absolutely no one would ever believe, when they saw him coming down the street, that here was a member of the watch trying to look inconspicuous. It occurred to Vimes that he knew absolutely nothing about Nobbs' outside working hours. He couldn't even remember where the man lived. All these years he'd known the man, and he'd never realized that in his secret private life, Corporal Nobbs was a bit of a peacock. A very short peacock. It was true. A peacock that had been hit repeatedly with something heavy, perhaps, but a peacock nonetheless. It just went to show you never could tell. He brought his attention back to the business in hand. "I want you two," he said to Nobbs and Colin, "to mingle unobtrusively, or obtrusively in your case, Corporal Nobbs, with people tonight, and see if you can detect anything unusual." "Unusual like what?" said the sergeant. Vimes hesitated. He wasn't exactly sure himself. "Anything," he said. "Pertinent." "Ah," the sergeant nodded wisely. "Pertinent. Right." There was an awkward silence. "Maybe people have seen weird things," said Captain Vimes. "Or perhaps there have been unexplained fires or footprints. You know," he finished desperately. "Signs of dragons." "You mean like piles of gold what have been slept on," said the sergeant. "And virgins being chained to rocks," said Nobbs knowingly. "I can see you're expert," sighed Vimes. "Just do the best you can." "This mingling," said Sergeant Colin delicately. "It would involve going into taverns and drinking and similar, would it?" "To a certain extent," said Vimes. "Ah," said the sergeant happily. "In moderation." "Right you are, sir. And at your own expense." "Oh." "But before you go," said the captain, "do either of you know anyone who might know anything about dragons, apart from sleeping on gold in the bit with the young women, I mean?" "Wizards would," volunteered Nobby. "Apart from wizards," said Vimes firmly. You couldn't trust wizards. Every guard knew you couldn't trust wizards. They were even worse than civilians. Colin thought about it. "There's always Lady Ramkin," he said. "Lives in Scoon Avenue. Breeds swamp dragons. You know, the little buggers people keep as pets." "Oh, her," said Vimes gloomily. "I think I've seen her around. The one with the Winnie if you love dragons sticker on the back of her carriage." "That's her. She's mental," said Sergeant Colin. "What do you want me to do, sir?" said Carrot. You have the most important job," said Vimes hurriedly. "I want you to stay here and watch the office." Carrot's face broadened in a slow, unbelieving grin. "You mean I'm left in charge, sir?" he said. "In a manner of speaking," said Vimes. "But you're not allowed to arrest anyone, understand?" he added quickly. "Not even if they're breaking the law, sir?" "Not even then. Just make a note of it." "I'll read my book then," said Carrot, "and polish my helmet." "Good boy," said the captain. It should be safe enough, he thought. No one ever comes in here, not even to report a lost dog. No one ever thinks about the watch. You'd have to be really out of touch to go to the watch for help, he thought bitterly. Scoon Avenue was a wide, tree-lined and incredibly select part of Ankh, high enough above the river to be away from its all-pervading smell. People in Scoon Avenue had old money, which was supposed to be much better than new money, although Captain Vimes had never had enough of either to spot the difference. People in Scoon Avenue had their own personal bodyguards. People in Scoon Avenue were said to be so aloof they wouldn't even talk to the gods. This was a slight slander. They would talk to gods if they were well-bred gods of decent family. Lady Ramkin's house was not hard to find. It commanded an outcrop that gave it a magnificent view of the city, if that was your idea of a good time. There were stone dragons on the gate post, and the gardens had an unkept, overgrown look. Statues of ramkins, long gone, loomed up out of the greenery. Most of them had swords and were covered in ivy up to the neck. Vimes sensed that this was not because the garden's owner was too poor to do anything about it, but rather that the garden's owner thought there were much more important things than ancestors, which was a pretty unusual point of view for an aristocrat. They also apparently thought that there were more important things than property repair. When he rang the bell of the rather pleasant old house itself, in the middle of a flourishing rhododendron forest, several bits of the plaster facade fell off.
Rhododendron.
Rhododendron, a shrub or small tree of the heath family, with large clusters of bell-shaped flowers and typically with large evergreen leaves, widely grown as an ornamental. When he rang the bell of the rather pleasant old house itself, in the middle of a flourishing rhododendron forest, several bits of the plaster facade fell off. That seemed to be the only effect, except that something round the back of the house started to howl. Some things. It started to rain again. After a while, Vimes felt the dignity of his position and cautiously edged around the building, keeping well back in case anything else collapsed. He reached a heavy wooden gate and a heavy wooden wall. In contrast with the general decrepitude of the rest of the place, it seemed comparatively new and very solid. He knocked. This caused another fusillade of strange whistling noises. The door opened. Something dreadful loomed over him. "Ah, good man, do you know anything about mating?" it boomed.